So friends, we're about to see if the rule of law can prevent a criminal defendant from threatening, harassing, and intimidating the witnesses against him. And we're about to see if the rule of law can protect the people's right to a fair trial. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, in a courtroom in Washington, D.C., we are about to see whether the rule of law is up to the task of protecting witnesses against the dangerous speech and posts of a defendant who's charged with a series of democracy-busting crimes. We're about to see if the rule of law is up to the task of ensuring an untainted jury pool, and we're about to see if the rule of law is up to the task of protecting the right of we the people to a fair trial. Because on Monday, Donald Trump's criminal case will be up in that courtroom in Washington, D.C. That's the case being presided over by Judge Tanya Chutkan, and she will hear argument on Special Counsel Jack Smith's motion for a gag order to restrict Donald Trump's speech and his posts, to protect witnesses, to preserve the jury pool, and to promote the people's right to a fair trial. And in the run-up to Monday's hearing, we've seen lots of headlines like this one from the Associated Press. A proposed gag order on Trump in his federal case is putting the judge in a tricky position. And that article begins, a proposed gag order aimed at reining in Donald Trump's incendiary rhetoric puts the judge overseeing his federal election interference case in a tricky position. She must balance the need to protect the integrity of the legal proceedings against the First Amendment rights of a presidential candidate to defend himself in public. U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan will hear arguments Monday in Washington over whether Trump has gone too far with remarks such as calling prosecutors a team of thugs and one possible witness a gutless pig. It's the biggest test yet for Chutkan, underscoring the unprecedented complexities of prosecuting the former Republican president as the judge vows not to let political considerations guide her decisions. You know, friends, ever since a possible Donald Trump gag order has been a topic of discussion, we have heard pundits and constitutional scholars and others saying some variation of, well, I'm a big believer in the First Amendment. I'm a big believer in our free speech rights. You know what, friends? I'm a big believer in the First Amendment's free speech guarantees as well. But you know what? I'm also a big believer in the rule of law. I'm a big believer in a defendant who is on release in not one but 4 felony cases being prohibited from threatening, harassing, and intimidating the witnesses against him. I'm a big believer in an untainted jury pool, and I'm a big believer in the right of we the people to a fair trial on Donald Trump's democracy-busting crimes. I'm a big believer in all of that. How about you? You know, if I were the judge, and here's the good news, friends, I absolutely believe Judge Tanya Chutkan will get this right. But if I were the judge, I would ask Donald Trump's criminal defense attorneys a series of questions along the following lines. I would say, okay, Mr. Defense Attorney, you would agree with me that your client, Donald Trump, or any defendant, cannot make statements that threaten, harass, or intimidate the witnesses against him, correct? You would agree with that proposition. And if the defense attorney wanted to retain any credibility. He would have to say, yes, Your Honor, I agree. A criminal defendant on release in a felony case cannot make statements or post or repost anything that would threaten, harass, or intimidate the witnesses who are expected to testify against him. I would then say, okay, Mr. Defense Attorney, you would agree that a defendant on release in a federal felony case cannot make statements or post anything that would taint the jury pool. I would agree with that, Your Honor. And then I would say, and you would also agree, would you not, that the Supreme Court has said in the case of Gentile versus State Bar of Nevada that courts can restrict extrajudicial, that is, out-of-court statements that pose a substantial likelihood of prejudice to a case, prejudice to a judicial proceeding. So you would agree with me, Mr. Defense Attorney, that the Supreme Court actually announced that trial court judges have that authority and discretion to limit those kind of statements if there is a reasonable likelihood they would prejudice this case, these judicial proceedings. Of course, the defense attorney would have to agree that that is the Supreme Court precedent. So if I were the judge, I would say, I'm glad we can agree on so much. So here's what we're going to do. Because you admit that your client may not make statements that could be perceived as threatening, intimidating, or harassing the witnesses against him, I will enter an order, a restriction, a limitation. I will prohibit defendant Trump from making any statements that could be reasonably interpreted as threatening a witness, intimidating a witness, or harassing a witness. And friends, that's just one example of how the judge can craft some narrowly restricted limitations and prohibitions on Donald Trump's speech and on his posts, a gag order, if you will. And then if I were the judge, I would add one more thing when I was done imposing all of these restrictions to try to protect the witnesses against Donald Trump's threats, to try to protect and promote the idea of an untainted jury pool, and to try to preserve the right of we the people to a fair trial on these charges, I would say one more thing, defendant Trump. In the event you violate any of the conditions that I am setting for you today, your conditions of pretrial release, let me make you one promise. In the event you are unable or unwilling to abide by the conditions of release I am setting for you today, I will revoke your pretrial release and I will detain you pending trial. Do you understand, defendant Trump? So here's the good news. I am putting the keys to the jail cell in your hand, figuratively speaking. All you have to do to avoid pretrial detention is comply with the conditions that I'm setting for you today. And if you choose not to, I won't just call you back into court to wag my finger at you or give you a stern talking to. I won't be imposing money sanctions because, let's face it, you would just grift off your base some more to satisfy any money sanction that was imposed. Okay, that's probably not something a judge would say, but friends, we all know that's what Donald Trump would do. If I were the judge, I would say, no, you will be revoked on pretrial release and detained pending trial. So friends, this really isn't the impossible, intractable challenge that some make it out to be. The Supreme Court has given trial court judges the tools and the authority to limit a defendant's speech, to protect, preserve, promote the integrity of the case, of the judicial proceedings. And the fact that Donald Trump happens to be a defendant who formerly was the President of the United States and is running for office again doesn't change the calculation. It doesn't give him any more rights, any added opportunity to threaten, harass, intimidate witnesses, taint the jury pool, or deprive we the people of a fair trial. So these are the kinds of restrictions that can be placed on Donald Trump and that must be placed on Donald Trump. Because justice matters. Friends, I'll be in court tomorrow, Monday, and I will let you all know how the hearing goes. I don't know whether we will get a ruling from Judge Chutkan tomorrow. She may want to take some time to absorb the arguments of counsel. She's already had the written filings, the motions, and the replies for some time, but she may want to take some time with the arguments that are made in court and then issue her ruling. I do expect it will be a fairly prompt ruling. If I had to guess, it may come within days of Monday's hearing, and my strong sense is she will get this right. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.